Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be replacing the drive shaft boot on this 1993 BMW R100 RS. So you can see kind of it under there. It looks clean, but you can see the oil kind of at the bottom there. That clean oil, so it's torn down there, and it's leaks oil right down there onto the exhaust, and then is kind of making a, you can see this up in here, it's making an oily mess all the way back. So it's all oily and nasty up there, all the way back to the rear drive here. So the rear drive and everything all up in there. All because of that boot right there. And I will have the new boot right here linked below, along with 2 new hose clamps, and these can be purchased from the BMW parts guy, and I'll also have that linked below. With a 6mm Allen on the inside of this frame piece right here, we're going to remove the left-hand exhaust, and those are just 2 6mm Allens, and they'll just come right out. They just thread right directly into the exhaust. And then the clamp right here on the exhaust, also a 6mm, and loosen that up. And then the whole exhaust system will just come right off. I shouldn't say the whole exhaust system, but just the silencer at the end. And then we can remove our rear wheel. I just like putting it in gear, and it's a 17mm socket. And we can just loosen those up. And then on the rear brake, we're going to need to totally loosen our rear brake shoe adjustment. Then we can go ahead and just pull the wheel straight out. And then we can loosen the 4 bolts that hold our rear drive to the swing arm. These are 12mm, and you're going to need like a 12-point wrench like that. So now our rear drive is just kind of sitting in here. It's held in place with the rear shock, and then obviously just kind of hanging on these studs up here. So there is drive shaft oil in here, in the drive shaft, which I suspected is probably majority of the ways leaked out, judging by the amount of oil along the swing arm. But I did place a drain pan underneath here just in case, but we're just going to go ahead and kind of pull back on the whole unit. The drive shaft might be kind of stuck to the swing arm there, but this whole thing should just kind of come apart. We're going to first kind of see if we can't get this shock slid off to the side, and then kind of buy us a little bit of room to pull back on the rear drive. And then just kind of pivot everything on out of there. I'm just going to take this rear shock and kind of just tie it up out of the way so it's not dangling down. And then we're going to kind of focus on getting this rear swing arm out of here. Just a small little screwdriver. These little caps pop off. We'll do that on both sides. And then a 27mm socket that's been ground down so the walls are relatively thin. You're going to go ahead and remove these nuts that tension the swing arm. I shouldn't say remove them, but you're just going to loosen them, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then with the 6mm Allen, we can remove these swing arm studs. These right here are not going to be torqued in very tight, because all these do is preload the swing arm bearings, and that big nut on the outside is what locks everything down. Now we can remove this torn boot. If we have both of these clamps loose, we can kind of pull everything back. And just pull these clamps and kind of this whole assembly here, just kind of pull it right off. Then that's going to expose where our drive shaft bolts to our transmission output shaft. So that has those same 12-point heads. It's actually a nut or a bolt this time, and those are going to be 10mm. So we're going to kind of work our way around, and I found by just putting the bike in gear is a good way to hold the transmission back. So you're going to have to kind of put it in neutral, put it in gear, put it in neutral, and go back and forth and just kind of work your way around, loosening up these 4 bolts here. And then once we have all those 4 bolts removed, we can go ahead and just remove the whole swing arm. So the drive shaft isn't really going to be able, or you're not really going to want to separate the drive shaft from the swing arm. It's kind of a whole nother job, but should be able to just fish this out of here, just like that. Here's our swing arm here and our swing arm boot. So you can just see how bad that was leaking. It has oil just absolutely just caked on here. Now when installing this new drive shaft boot, it says like Oben, I think that's German for on top, or I don't know. That has to be on the top side, and these clamps here are going to be oriented with the screwer on the bottom. So it'll sit in there just like that. Okay, so we got our swing arm all cleaned up under here. We're going to go ahead and feed our boot, which this can be kind of difficult. I'm actually just going to put this on without the hose clamps so those aren't in the way. And then we'll just take them apart and kind of feed it over everything after. So we're going to stretch this boot around the swing arm here. Get that still started there and kind of turned, so the open right here is on top and this is kind of centered along the swing arm there. And then, this is kind of the tricky part. Another thing that I kind of forgot to mention, now is a good time to check these swing arm bearings. So you can just go ahead and move them back and forth and just feel for notchiness or whatever. These ones actually feel really good, so we're not going to worry about it. Feed this up through here. And this is where it's going to get kind of a little tricky. So I'm actually kind of letting the swing arm is not really held in here in place very well. And I am, the boot is around the swing arm, and I'm just pushing on the drive shaft from the back, or the very back of the swing arm. And I just want to get this kind of lined up with these bolt holes up here. And then put these bolts in. And I'll have replacement bolts linked down below as well, right next to everything else you'll need to do this job. And then with that same 10mm wrench, we're going to work our way around and tighten all these up. Now we can install these bearing studs. So, super easy. We're just going to kind of get everything aligned here. The bearing should the stud should kind of drop onto the bearing and then get it started by hand into the frame. So now we can go ahead and tension our swing arm bearing pivot studs. So we're going to want to have just the slightest bit of load on those bearing pins. So you shouldn't really tighten them at all. And at first what we're going to do is there's this gap right there, right where the swing arm and the frame interface, and those studs kind of float right there, if you can see that. So the swing arm bearing is floating on those studs. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take up all this play, but we're going to want both sides between this frame and the swing arm. We're going to want to get that gap even on both sides. So now the distances where our swing arm to frame distance there is perfectly even on both sides. And you can feel our swing arm is nice and it's not notchy. It's nice and smooth right there. And then side to side, so like this way, there's no play. And then we can go ahead and torque our big nut right here, the big 27mm. Make sure that this boot is in the proper orientation so it moves properly and doesn't tear. And then I'm going to get this hose clamp tightened up here. Work your fingers around getting this boot over the transmission. It might help to kind of support the swing arm to have it in line with the transmission like that. But yeah, you just kind of have to work with it and get this around there, and then feed that clamp over. So now we can fish our hose clamp around the swing arm boot. And then we can just pump a bunch of grease into the center of this bearing stud that the bearing rides on. We can now go ahead and reinstall the rear drive housing to the swing arm, as well as, I guess, to the rear shock. This rear drive goes right over the swing arm, and then the shock goes through that rear drive. And so now it's all engaged, and the rear drive is flush up against the swing arm, and then the shock falls in right there. And then put our shock bolt and washer in with that 16 mil. And then we can go ahead and reinstall our rear wheel. Since our exhaust is removed, it just kind of rolls in here really nicely. And then I just kind of have to put it over the brakes and line up the wheel studs right there. Then we can go ahead and reinstall these with a 17 millimeter. And then we can reinstall our exhaust system. So just slide it on your muffler there. And then we can go ahead and adjust our rear brake. So to adjust our rear brake, what we're going to want to do is just roll the wheel in the normal direction and keep turning this adjustment nut in and in and in until the brake starts to, until you can start to hear it drag on the wheel. And then you're just going to adjust it at your foot, kind of where you want how you want that foot pedal to feel. I prefer it nice and tight, so we're just going to go in on this until we feel it drag. Just starting to drag. Let's see how this feels. That right there is pretty tight, so we're going to go back. Let's go back a turn and a half. Kind of just, that right there feels pretty good. Nice and grabby right where, with a little bit of free play in there. It's not rubbing, rolls nice and easy. So that's right where we want that. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit that subscribe button. I pump out all sorts of videos like this across all sorts of BMW years and models. Everything from an old Airhead like this to like more modern K bikes and S bikes. But please hit that like button. Leave a comment below of what you want to see. Have a safe ride.